In the quiet outskirts of British Columbia, a woman escaped from a pig farm, bloodied, handcuffed, and terrified. She told police a man tried to kill her. They didn't believe her, but they should have. That man was Robert Pickton, and buried beneath his farm were the remains of dozens of missing women. Welcome to Ashes and Alibis, where every case leaves behind more than just ashes, it leaves a trail of overlooked truth. Robert Willie Pickton was born October 24th, 1949, into filth. The Pickton farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, wasn't just dirty, it was decaying. Animals roamed freely through the home. The smell of pig excrement lingered in every corner. The family rarely cleaned. His mother, Louise, ran the house and the farm with an iron grip. She was a small but domineering woman who taught her sons that outsiders couldn't be trusted. Willie was quiet, socially stunted. At school, he was teased relentlessly for his odor, his filthy clothes, his inability to form full sentences. He dropped out in the 9th grade and worked full-time as a butcher's apprentice. He learned precision, how to bleed, skin, and dismember, a skill set that would serve him long after his knives left the butcher block. People who knew him said he was slow. But there was something else, something darker. A few neighbors said he had a glassy stare, like no one was home. He was known for hoarding. Old cars, appliances, trash, stacked 10 feet high, and pigs, dozens of them. Locals were creeped out, but also amused. He was seen as the weird pig guy. Harmless. But that's what made him dangerous. He blended in. In the late 90s, Willie and his brother Dave registered a charity, the Piggy Palace Good Time Society. It claimed to raise money for community causes, but in reality, a filthy warehouse hosted drug-fueled parties and raves. Drugs, bikers, women, many didn't return. In 1991, Pickton sent a tape-recorded letter to a woman named Victoria. At face value, it was a grievance. He rambled about how he'd been wronged, but listening closer, it's chilling.
They're trying to stab me in the back, but it ain't gonna work. I had no peace of mind for 4.5 years. I forgive them, but I'm not forgetting. I felt like going up to somebody and just blasting them in the head. It's always been me against the world.
This wasn't just a man venting. This was someone who believed he was a victim, who saw violence as justice, and no one, not even police, was listening. The downtown east side of Vancouver was, and still is, one of Canada's most vulnerable neighborhoods. Addiction, poverty, mental illness. In the 1990s, sex workers began to disappear, dozens of them. The public didn't seem to care. They were Indigenous, poor, transient, high-risk women. Families tried to file reports, only to be brushed off. Police labeled them runaways, junkies. Some officers even suggested they'd just moved on. This lack of concern for vulnerable people, especially sex workers and Indigenous women, made it easy for someone like Pickton to get away with his crimes. It was like their disappearances were seen as just part of the life they led, instead of a serious crime that needed to be looked into right away. But on the ground, something sinister was happening. Women whispered about a man in a pickup truck, one who paid well, who offered rides to the suburbs, who had a farm. In March 1997, Wendy Lynn Eistetter fought for her life, literally. After being picked up by Pickton, she was taken to his farm, where he violently attacked her, stabbing her 4 times. Remarkably, she managed to grab the very knife he used against her and successfully used it against him in self-defense. Still partially handcuffed, bleeding heavily, she somehow escaped and flagged down help. Both Pickton and Wendy ended up at the same hospital. He in one room, she in another. Wendy still had one cuff locked on her wrist. When RCMP searched Pickton, they found the matching handcuff key in his pocket. That should have been enough, but it wasn't. And Pickton? He walked away, free to kill again. Following Wendy's harrowing escape, police conducted a limited search of Pickton's property. What they found was disturbing, even then. Following her escape, officers searched Pickton's property. They recovered the knife, bloody clothing, and rubber boots Pickton had worn, evidence that sat untouched. Remarkably, DNA from 2 missing women was only tested and matched in 2004. But instead of digging deeper, they dismissed it as circumstantial. The charges were inexplicably dropped. Key evidence was mishandled or lost. Some believe it was incompetence. Others suspect it was something worse, a deliberate failure. The judge chose not to pursue the case further, as they deemed the victim unreliable, citing her history with drug use. Despite the alarming evidence and Wendy's eyewitness account, the case crumbled. Police never obtained a warrant to fully search the farm. They chose not to investigate further. This was the second time Pickton had been linked to violence against women, and yet, nothing. By the early 2000s, families of the missing were furious. Police claimed they had no evidence. But we know that wasn't true. In 1999, a former employee told police there were freezers on the Pickton farm, filled with human flesh. Still, no raid. For years, the families of missing women begged police to listen. Instead, they were gaslit, dismissed, and ignored. Officers claimed there was no evidence and no pattern. Yet behind the scenes, whistleblowers were watching it all rot from the inside. In 2010, former RCMP Corporal Catherine Galliford, once the media spokesperson for the Missing Women's Task Force, broke her silence. She alleged that RCMP officers weren't just incompetent, they were negligent. In her own words, they were more interested in drinking and having sex with each other than solving the case. But it didn't stop at misconduct. Galliford described a toxic culture of sexism and abuse where victims of sexual harassment inside the force were silenced, just like the families of the women outside of it. In her own words, Galliford explains, there was misogyny, there was abuse, there was sexual harassment, and it mirrored exactly how the women in the downtown East Side were treated. She went on to say that key leads were ignored and internal warnings about Pickton were brushed aside for years. Her most damning allegation? That officers tolerated a 3-year delay in arresting Pickton, even after multiple warnings and damning tips, including one about a freezer full of human flesh on the farm in 1999. And yet, nothing. She says she became a target, and that at one point an officer from the Vancouver Police Department told her, in front of others, that he was writing a story about Pickton in his head. He said, I have a fantasy about the ending, and it's about Pickton escaping from jail, stripping you naked, stringing you from a meat hook, and gutting you like a pig, Galliford said. Disgustingly, she explains how they actually started laughing and fist-tapping each other. Catherine Galliford went on to explain, I was the RCMP spokesperson. I read the lies on TV, and I couldn't do it anymore. Galliford was supposed to testify at the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry. But just a month before the hearings, she was deemed too fragile, citing post-traumatic stress disorder, alcoholism, and agoraphobia stemming from her time on the force. The very institution she exposed tried to label her broken, but her truth rippled. A class action lawsuit followed. Over 400 female officers joined. Many say it was Galliford's bravery that gave them the strength to come forward. She named names. She didn't flinch. I won't testify for the RCMP. I'll testify for the victims, Galliford said. The RCMP tried to discredit her. She named names, and she refused to be silenced. In a CBC exclusive interview, Catherine Galliford shared her story.
Catherine Galliford says the harassment started with the officer who recruited her into the RCMP and continued until the day she left 16 years later.
She's been subjected to sexual assaults, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and then this mismanagement of her medical file.
Her lawyer says this 26-page statement of claim against 3 Mounties, an RCMP doctor, a Vancouver police detective, BC's Justice Minister, and Canada's Attorney General exposes a pattern of abuse that left his client unable to work with post-traumatic stress disorder. Her lawsuit claims this man, Marvin Wawia, stalked her, forced her to have sex, and threatened her.
He also threatened to shoot me with his service revolver because I wasn't really cooperating that well with him.
When working on the Air India task force, she says her boss, Doug Henderson, tried to be intimate with her. Later, while looking for evidence against serial killer Robert Pickton, she claims this Vancouver police detective, Phil Little, tried to have sex with her in a cruiser.
In February 2002, officers executed a weapons warrant on Pickton's farm, finally cracking open what had long been whispered about but routinely dismissed. What they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators. This wasn't some spontaneous discovery. It was the culmination of years of ignored red flags, the disappearances of several marginalized women from Vancouver's downtown east side, names that would soon become hauntingly familiar. Serena Abbotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Ann Wolfe, Georgina Faith Pepin, and Marnie Frey all occurred between August 30th, 1997, and February 5th, 2002. These 6 women were the earliest confirmed victims linked to Pickton. Only in 2002, when a weapons warrant provided legal grounds for a search, did police finally return to the property. But what they walked into wasn't just a weapons bust, it was a massacre site, preserved in the most grotesque detail. Inside the farm buildings, investigators found severed human remains, skulls cut in half, limbs in buckets filled with lime, blood-soaked women's clothing, and personal effects like lipstick-covered ID cards and purses. Freezers stored far more than meat. Among the recovered evidence was a .22 caliber revolver, bizarrely modified with an adult novelty item used as a makeshift silencer. The barrel tested positive for DNA from both Pickton and one of the missing women. Elsewhere on the property, bones and remains were uncovered in feed troughs, garbage bags, and pig pens. A human jawbone was found inside a plastic pail. A heavily stained mattress hinted at what may have been a kill room. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, often under psychological strain, as the sheer scale of the horror began to emerge. By April 2002, Pickton was formally charged. DNA confirmed the remains of 33 women, though authorities feared the real number could be far higher, perhaps over 50. As such, they placed an undercover informant in Pickton's jail cell, where he admitted to taking the lives of 49 women, and he was upset that he didn't make it to 50.
Really? I was in my work, making that's what I was stopping people for. Yeah.
Despite his own admissions, more than 65 women were formally reported missing leading up to his arrest, so the true extent of his crimes may never fully be uncovered. In one of the most disturbing revelations, investigators alleged that Pickton had disposed of some remains by feeding them to his pigs. But even more chilling were claims that human flesh may have been ground up and mixed with pork, then distributed publicly. This possibility triggered a province-wide health advisory warning anyone who may have consumed meat products sourced from the farm. This horrifying revelation raised immediate public health concerns, particularly given that Pickton had previously sold pork to the public and had even been known to provide meat to local restaurants and events, thereby extending the potential contamination concerns significantly. Pickton long insisted he wasn't acting alone. In letters to pen pals, he repeatedly claimed he was the fall guy, implying others were involved, possibly including police or people he knew personally. During the investigation, police arrested 3 other individuals, one being Pat Casanova, a friend of Pickton. His DNA was discovered on small arms weapons, saw tool equipment, and in some reports even linked to remains found at the farm, but charges were never pursued. Pickton's own statements hinted at a broader network. He claimed other associates, and possibly cops, were complicit in the crimes, yet only he ever faced prosecution. Despite the presence of over 40 unidentified male DNA profiles found at the farm, no further arrests were made. This underscores the mishandled nature of this case, considering that official lawsuits have been filed in response to allegations that the police allegedly destroyed evidence in the Pickton case. Not that we should be taking a serial killer's word seriously. One can't help but feel as though there was way more at play here. These discrepancies fueled speculation. Was Pickton merely the visible face of something far more widespread and protected? Many families never received full closure, as not all victims were conclusively identified. The investigation became one of the largest and most expensive in Canadian history, lasting nearly 2 years and costing over $70 million. But for the families of the victims, most of whom had pleaded for help long before the raid, justice came tragically late. In 2007, Robert Pickton was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder, though the remains or DNA of 33 women were found. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the harshest sentence available in Canada at the time. In a disturbing twist, 2024 marked the year Pickton became eligible to apply for parole. The public backlash was immediate and severe, with families of the victims, human rights advocates, and politicians alike decrying the idea that a man responsible for one of the most gruesome killing sprees in Canadian history could even be considered for release. However, before any parole hearing could take place, fate took another turn. In May 2024, Pickton was violently attacked by another inmate at Port Cartier Institution in Quebec. He succumbed to his injuries days later. The attack was reportedly premeditated, and the inmate responsible allegedly targeted Pickton due to the notoriety and disturbing nature of his crimes. While some viewed his death as a form of long overdue justice, others pointed out the deep flaws in the system that allowed Pickton to operate for so long in the first place. For the families, there was no real closure, just another chapter in a saga filled with horror, negligence, and heartbreak. The story of Robert Pickton is more than just a tale of horror. It's a scathing indictment of a system that ignored its most vulnerable for far too long. These women weren't just names on a list. They were mothers, sisters, daughters, friends. They deserved to be heard, to be believed, and to be protected. As we reflect on the failures that allowed this nightmare to unfold, we must also ask ourselves, what has really changed since then? If you found this deep dive compelling, disturbing, or important, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories that deserve to be told, not for the shock value, but to honor those lost and expose the cracks in the system before history repeats itself. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the case and let me know which stories you want to see covered next.